Well, it is time to dip my toes back into the waters of Axanar. I did decide to leave the daily fight behind, but it's the gift that keeps on giving, and the man that enjoys receiving those presents and dishing out some of his own is Carlos Pedraza. Carlos, thanks for coming back to Trekzone, man.
Good to talk to you again, Matt.
Now, what has Alec been doing? What's been going on?
Well, the latest is actually a pretty big move on his end, with the launch of a Patreon campaign to pay for he calls it a studio, but it hasn't actually turned into a studio. It is as it was when they moved in almost 2 years ago, a warehouse in suburban Georgia, outside Atlanta, and where the set for the bridge of the USS Ares is located today. And kudos, it's a very nice looking set, and was completed late last year thanks to the efforts of a lot of volunteers who spent a lot of time getting it into shape in time for AxCon. But what we're finding out is that back at that time, what he was still calling OWC Studios, sponsored by Otherworld Computing, a rather large tech company, had lost its sponsorship by that point. And while he's explaining it away as it having been an expired 1-year sponsorship agreement, there's nothing to indicate that was actually the case other than him saying it now in retrospect. And even if it were the case, the timing, the timeline that he proposes for when he took over paying the rent on the facility, which means that, from that we can be able to tell when the sponsorship agreement ended, it doesn't line up. 1 minute he says it was 4 months ago. Later it's 5 months ago. Later again it's 6 months ago. So we don't know when. But no matter what, it's clear that that sponsorship ended, and under reasons that he's refusing to explain, other than saying that it had expired, which can mean anything really. So that means he's stuck needing to pay about $4,000 in rent and utilities and insurance and other expenses to keep the place going. Now, mind you, by keep the place going, nothing has been made there yet. He's made an arrangement for a high school video program to come in and use the facility, use the sets. But there's no lighting equipment available. There's no lighting grid available. It is not soundproofed. The electrical there is not has not been upgraded to be able to actually light any sets. So, this is a pretty bare bones operation that is as it was when they moved in. And when at that point, Axanar spokesman Mike Bodden told me that they were not anticipating doing any of those kinds of improvements. So this is just $4,000 to keep the place open and keep the lights on. They don't even have internet there. Why? Alec Peters admits that it's because they don't spend enough time there. So you tell me how much activity is really going on in this facility that he's turning around and asking his supporters to give him fork over $4,000 every single month to keep open. So that's where we are today. It's going gangbusters at pledges of $1,000 a month, just over $1,000 a month from about 120 patrons. But of course, after a very strong opening the first 2 days, it has fallen off now into the single digits of new patrons every day. And so it's not growing by very much, and they're still quite a ways away from the $4,000 goal.
Having said that, it is a pretty remarkable feat to get to where he is with that Patreon campaign in such a short amount of time. Sort of when you look around at other campaigns or other Patreon campaigns, those figures do take some time. So there seems to be the Axanar faithful for lack of a better term, have a lot of cash to splash, and they're going to give it to him. Whether he's going to get to that $4,000 or not, he's put a deadline on it of February 15, I think it is. He's obviously got bills to pay, and they're coming up due very, very soon, within a fortnight. If he doesn't meet those $4,000, I believe we already know what his next plan is going to be, because the warehouse is up for lease, isn't it?
Yes, that lease is due to expire, I believe, in May. But just like with the Indiegogo campaign he ran to try to save his California warehouse, and that failed, he has a plan B. His plan B when he was back in California was this new facility in Georgia. And now that he's at risk of losing that new facility, he has a plan to move next door, literally, to a brand new set of warehouse spaces that are owned by the same landlord. They're about to open. They're much smaller, about half the size of his current facility, and he's ready to move the bridge set and everything else in there. So we're seeing a steady contraction in the Axanar footprint as time goes on. And, and again, credit where it's due, it is pretty good to get over $1,000 in monthly commitments from people in the course of a couple of weeks. But the problem is that, he's going to be signing a lease based on what is really a volatile source of income. It is just as when people sign up to Patreon, they're signing up because you as a creator are promising them a steady stream of new content that is worth the $2, $5, $10, or $20 a month that you're handing over to them. And if at some point they feel like they're not getting their money's worth, all they have to do is press a button and it's over from them. So that means you have to produce a lot of quality content, to keep those people sticking with you. And whether Alec can do that at the quality level that they're going to expect is a question mark. And to basically commit yourself to a landlord to pay them, $48,000 a year based on money that can easily dissolve at any time, I think is pretty dangerous from a management standpoint. Similarly, he points to money he's making from monetizing the Axanar YouTube channel, and he says that that's at about $600 a month. But again, that's newly monetized, by which I mean that he had his new tech person start posting clips from visual effects that were to have gone to Axanar and other videos on there. But this is all recycled material. It's material that was already created, by Tobias Richter in terms of the visual effects, cut together by Rob Burnett. Tobias isn't free, so unless he's going to pay Tobias a lot of money to keep churning out this stuff, there's no new material coming from Tobias. And Rob, of course, as we know, has decamped from Axanar, and so he's not going to get any new material from Rob Burnett. So ultimately, these videos that have been steadily posted over the last month are going to come to an end, and the question will be, well, what are you going to offer that will keep these patrons with you?
I think one of the biggest draw cards, though, was being able to watch an hour of Axacon every month for the next 26 months. Was there 26 hours of Axacon
yeah,
content?
It was 20 something hours, and what is that? It's 2 years. That means by the time you see the last one of those videos, Axacon will have been more than 2 years past. So you're going to be hearing stuff that is dated, that's that doesn't apply anymore, from people who may not even be with the project by that point. And we've seen a steady drop off of key creative people from Axanar over the past 5 years, and there's no reason to believe that won't continue to happen given the lack of progress on that project.
I think some of the information from Axicon is already out of date and has already changed plans, and things are changing almost daily now with the way things are changing around. And one of the biggest changes that we've noticed, and whether it's whether he's realised that he's done this or not, it was always suspected that Jonathan Lane was, a cast member of Axanar, a crew member, given especially with his deposition where he actually said that he was a writer, that he has signed a non-disclosure agreement. He is working with Alec to put the message of Axanar out there. What do you make of all of that and the changes with Jonathan and some of the things that he's been saying?
I in some ways, I think this is much ado about nothing. It shouldn't strike anyone as a surprise that Jonathan is Axanar's biggest cheerleader. I mean, he has been totally above board about that. I mean, what it means that he signed an affidavit saying he's a writer for Axanar Productions. What does that really mean? I mean, he testified. He testified to it before a court. But it's, does it mean he was employee? No, he wasn't. He admits that. But it does mean that he was writing on its behalf, and that he was that his agenda was the promotion of Axanar. And, I don't think anyone is surprised to hear that. I mean, that's exactly the role that Jonathan says he fills on behalf of Axanar. So I'm not sure that part is that big a surprise. The NDA is news. The fact that he had signed one, the fact that he said in his own words that he doesn't publish any news about Axanar without clearing it through Alec Peters first. He's since tried to retract that. I read somewhere that the thread on which that was admitted has since been deleted, shockingly. So those words can't be used against him. But, when stuff is out on the internet, it tends to stick around. There are plenty of screenshots of that post from him. And, so what that means, though, is that we explicitly know what the relationship is, when it comes to news that we hear about Axanar as it appears in anything that Jonathan publishes online. Again, the substantive difference there is probably not very big, because it's not going to change what he has written, what he will write, what he is writing now. It just makes it very clear to us now today that he's not just a blogger writing about Axanar as an observer, but actually a participant in the way that Axanar's news is being packaged and presented to the public.
And being a blogger and writing his own website, obviously he's free to do whatever the hell he likes.
Sure.
But I think it just comes across as disingenuous when he does try and separate himself out, but then on the other hand try to defend himself to those Axanar supporters. And I think Mr. Tiggy on his Monitoring the Trek Monitors blog actually said it the best when he posited a couple of questions in his recent article a couple of days ago. Maybe Jonathan will swing on by in the comments and answer the questions, since he clears everything with Alec before talking anything Axanar. Will get the best answer possible. So it's almost become, Jonathan has become the new PR person. He's a bit more vocal than Mike Borden is these days.
Well, Mike he runs a business that actually does things. So that's where he's been prioritizing his time. And since there's really not a ton of Axanar news, despite Axicon was a very great opportunity for optics and to get people talking about Axanar again. I think that Alec Peters was very successful in that. He got a slew of headlines on blogs, on different science fiction news websites all around the web, talking about how Axanar was back and Axanar is in production again, which of course is not true. It is not in production. It is nowhere near production. It has no money to to be produced. But what it does have is a very, very nice looking bridge set, and that's what people are focusing on. And he himself has admitted that the optics of it were to generate enthusiasm and momentum as he moved into what he knew at the time that Axacon was going on, was that he needed to raise money to keep that warehouse, even though he hadn't said anything at that point about the OWC sponsorship having come to an end. And of course, that's his pattern. He does not disclose anything that might be considered bad news until he absolutely has to. So, by my count, if you go with his 4 months of paying rent account, that puts him back in around October as when he took over the rent payments for the warehouse. But then, of course, 2 days later, he said it was 6 months, which puts it back in July or August. And then, less than an hour after that, on one of his live chats on YouTube, he said it was 5 months. Either way, it means that at the time of Axacon, there was no OWC sponsorship anymore. And, and as late September, he said in an interview with Jonathan Lane that he'd just gotten off the phone with had a conference call with OWC, and they're very happy with how things are going, and there was no clue in what he was disclosing at that point that that was coming to an end. Of course, now he says that it was expired, but then why didn't he disclose that in September when he made it seem like everything was fine and dandy with OWC? And clearly at that point it was not, because a week later they stopped paying the rent there.
Well, Carlos, there is so much to unpack because we haven't spoken on a Trekzone podcast since my Perth trip back in April last year. So will you stick around and come back for a part 2 on this chat?
Always happy to oblige.
Fantastic, Carlos. Thanks for your time. Starting next week, episodes will be out every Friday, so smash that subscribe button if you haven't already. Hit the bell icon to be notified when those episodes are dropped. Trekzone membership, of course, is also available. Head to patreon.com/Trekzone.org.au and sign up monthly to get early access to Trekzone conversation episodes. And I'd really appreciate your support, but of course, it is still always going to be free to view right here on YouTube and through iTunes subscription as well, or your favourite podcast hosting app. This is a Trekzone Conversation. I'm Matt Miller. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.